The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne. Coming up, gun violence remains a troubling issue following the recent attacks in New York City. Representative for the Center for Court Innovations joins me to discuss how the issue of gun violence will affect our community. Why is gun violence an issue for our city? After that, Ketanji Brown Jackson makes history as the first Black woman to become a Supreme Court justice. Vice President of the Harvard Black Law Students Association joins me to discuss this victory. What does this win mean to Black women in law? Then the pandemic may have changed the way we approach the workplace. Vice President and Chief of Research at Gartner joins me to discuss trends that will shape work in 2022 and beyond. Will employers and employees adapt to a new standard of work? And lastly, as employees return to the workplace, they are noticing their favorite lunch items may cost more than they remember. Executive Director for NYC Hospitality Alliance joined me to discuss the trend many are calling lunchflation. Why are we seeing a price increase in lunch menu items? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. The issue of gun violence remains a troubling issue for New York, and following recent attacks, many people question the safety of our city. Joining me to discuss gun violence and crimes in the Bronx and the actions needed to address this critical issue is Hailey Nolasco, Director of Community-Based Violence Prevention at the Center for Court Innovation. Hailey, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, can you tell me about your organization, Center for Court Innovation?
Yes, of course. So for the past 25 years, the Center for Court Innovation has worked to really create a fairer, more effective, and more humane justice system. And we've always been operating from a space of innovation, and we've been planning and implementing programs to really test out new ideas, solve problems, and really find ways of achieving systems change. So a lot of our projects we have over 36 projects that are operating at the Center for Court Innovation right now, and a lot of them are really focused on community violence based intervention programs, alternatives to incarceration, reentry initiatives, court-based programs, and just really working to reduce the gamut of unnecessary incarceration and promote positive individual and family change. So really working on changing the whole dynamic of around what the system currently is, really working towards a non-carceral approach and being holistic in our practices, and again, being innovative, just like our name states, how to create safer.
Now, you offer several programs, and one of them is the Bronx Community Justice Center, known for their work like the Save Our Streets movement. What is the goal of the BCJC?
So really, it's similar to our overall goal is really creating a safer, more equitable Bronx. So really thinking about what are community-driven public safety initiatives that are really based in community, led by community, informed by community, using restorative practices to repair harm that's being caused in community. Also increasing youth opportunities, really focusing on economic mobility, specifically in the South Bronx, and really making sure that the Bronx is a safe and thriving space. And when we're talking about SOS Bronx in particular, it's a part of the New York City crisis management system, really focusing on using people who are credible messengers who are known in their community to mitigate, de-escalate, and prevent violence from happening. And in the moments when violence does happen, really focusing to ensure that retaliations aren't taking place and making sure the community has an opportunity to heal from the harm that's been caused. And again, that it encompasses credible messengers who are violence interrupters, outreach workers that really know the community, and the community really knows, values, and trusts them to be able to make their community safe.
Now, in the Bronx and throughout New York City, we've actually seen an increase in gun violence. Unfortunately, one case that comes to mind is a 23-year-old who was killed on April 12th while sitting in her car. Why do you think we're seeing such an increase in these violent gun related crimes?
Well, I think it's really important for us when we're talking about an increase in violence and in crime that we really focus on what's happened in the past 2 years. So, pandemic era spikes in violence have taken place across the country and not just in New York City. And it's really important that we note that and call it for what it is. Violence was at historic lows before the pandemic, with major felonies citywide dropping to about 50% in 2000 2019. So the pandemic really brought about a lot of intersecting crises in public health, education, financial stability, and the access to services, and also impacted people's mental health. And when you put all those things together, it really creates this an issue that really impacts our public safety, right? So it's really important that we really focus on that because when we're under resourced and don't have access to things that would usually help to keep people busy or make sure that people are able to access their much needed resources. There's really a problem that can exist there. So it's really important that we understand as a city where we're going and what's affected. Especially just to tie that piece up where George Floyd's murder also a lot of community trust in government, specifically with law enforcement, and a lot of people in our communities. We had researched over 300 young people that are known gun carriers, and they mentioned that they carried guns for safety as well. So it's really important.
Now, our borough is still mourning the loss of 16-year-old Angela Yambo, and sadly, we've seen more victims of senseless gun violence since then. Has getting access to firearms become too easy?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the Bronx, along with the entire city, is definitely mourning the loss of life at the hands of senseless gun violence. And in the state of New York, where we have such tough gun laws, access to firearms continues to be accessible because of bordering states with lax gun laws, especially with guns coming down the iron pipeline. So I would definitely say that the current situation that we're experiencing has a lot to do not just with New York laws, but a lot of our bordering states and ensuring that we're able to put policies in place to mitigate and increase the access of guns being able to come to our city and the hands of folks that should have been.
Now, in most of these cases, unfortunately, the victims are innocent bystanders. Do you feel the city is actually doing enough to make New Yorkers feel safe in our city?
Well, the city is definitely paying attention and has had, I want to say that the city right now has the opportunity to really make a great changes and increasing our public safety, but by taking a really thoughtful approach and not only being reactive in response. So I think that the city is listening. We have a great opportunity right now, and it's important that we're proactive, to be able to prevent more exposure of harm to happen to New Yorkers, not just by community violence, but also by systemic violence as well.
Now, NYPD statistics show that from January 1st until this month, there were 131 ghost guns found in New York City. According to the New York Post, a ghost gun may have been used in the shooting of the three Bronx teens and the murder of Miss Yambo. Could you explain for those who don't know what a ghost gun is, and are they a danger to New York City?
So ghost guns, and the best way that I'm able to explain it is a gun that's one easy to be made. You can make it in your home, and it's easy to not trace or not know that someone has it. So it's definitely something that we should be paying attention to. They're unregulated, and it's something that we should be focusing a lot on. If somebody's able to make a gun in their home, it does definitely create a public safety issue.
So NYC also had a very frightening experience with the shooting on a Brooklyn MTA train station. In response, Mayor Eric Adams says this is not only a New York City problem, this is violence, these guns, this relentless shootings are an American problem. Mayor Adams goes on to say it's going to take all levels of government to solve it. Do you agree with this, and why or why not?
I totally agree that it's going to take all levels of gun violence to work together, but again, to create tangible and well thought out solutions that aren't only based in crisis and that don't create more harm to Black and Brown communities and that are equitable and include community voice. Because this isn't only an issue that's affecting our transit system, so we shouldn't be designing public safety policy around isolated incidents. So it's definitely going to take a coordinated effort, and we're hoping that continues to include community residents to be able to design what that is.
Now, following the attacks, Mayor Adams says his administration is looking into metal detector technology that could be placed inside subway stations. Do you think this is a good solution?
Well, I'd have to say no. I'm sorry, I definitely would have to say no here. I do not believe that this is a good solution, and in practice, I think it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. I really believe that this would create a deterrent for people to even want to use the subway system, just already struggling with getting orders on. Right, transportation in our city should be safe, easily accessible, and we shouldn't be creating additional barriers to transportation for New Yorkers. Metal detector technology really wouldn't assuage the issue of why people are using guns in the first place or even wanting to access guns. Again, we need to really focus on. I understand the need to want to be to want to put things in place to ensure our safety, but we can't do that without making sure that we're focused on the root cause issues of gun violence.
Now, when it comes to upgrades for the MTA, stations in low-income areas usually see these upgrades last. If they were to put out metal detectors, would the city benefit from implementing these changes in low-income or high-risk areas first?
Well, again, I would definitely say I'm still not in agreement with the metal detectors. But if we were if we were upgrading transit systems or upgrading whenever we want to upgrade to a community in general, I totally believe that improving neighborhood infrastructure will always improve quality of life for residents. And we know that it's always been good for public safety when people feel valued and seen and can really see the light and life of a vibrant neighborhood. Then we know that people will. People come from a space that they're included in what their community is. So taking elements from like placekeeping, placemaking, crime prevention through environmental design, where we're incorporating elements that create safer neighborhoods as lighting, murals, painting, gardens, anything that makes people feel like they're seen, valued, and have a say in what their communities look like will always have a great impact on public safety.
So we have about 2 minutes left. Can you tell me more about the efforts of the SOS program?
Yes, of course. So to what I mentioned before, SOS is a program that's a part of the New York City crisis management system, working throughout the Bronx and also in Brooklyn, working with credible messengers to really work on making your community safer. These are individuals that go out that are courageous. They don't go out with any like bulletproof vests or any weapons of the kind. They just have a heart of gold and their commitment to community and people that trust them to be able to keep them safe. So I would definitely encourage you all to learn more about SOS programs and also learn more about the different programs that we have across the center. I think one good program to also think about is the RISE project that's looking at the intersections of gun violence and intimate partner violence, and also even looking at a lot of the work that we have going on in Brownsville and Brooklyn around placekeeping and just entrepreneurship opportunities and entrepreneurial investments for young people. Definitely encouraging you all to follow us, learn more, get involved. We're always looking for volunteers. If you are somebody yourself that feels that you can play a role in public safety, I would definitely encourage you all to come join us and be a part of the movement.
All right. Hailey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Very important conversation.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. In the last year, we saw so many women of color taking on positions of power, including our very first Black female borough president in the Bronx. And we're continuing that with Ketanji Brown Jackson making history as the first Black woman to become a Supreme Court justice. Joining me to discuss what this means for women in law is incoming president of the Harvard Black Law Students Association, Dara Ferguson. Dara, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, Judge Jackson made history as the first Black woman Supreme Court justice. As a Black woman sharing a similar background in education, how does it feel to see this?
It feels historic. It feels crazy that I'm living through a history moment. You know, sometimes you see that there are always going to be first in your field and first doing things that you endeavor to do. But to see the first Black woman on the Supreme Court feels like we have done ourselves, or Black women have been done a disservice. There are so many educated Black women lawyers that are doing great things in the community, that are judges, that to see her rise and the confirmation of her as the new Supreme Court justice was exciting, but also a moment of reflection for me, because she's an amazing woman. She is qualified and she is supreme, and she has done everything that anybody could do to get to where she is. However, she was still questioned and her character was still called out in ways in which we haven't seen other justices, nominated justices, be spoken to before. So as a Black woman who endeavors to be a judge, her confirmation was beautiful, but at the same time, it just showed the historic problems that we have in our nation.
Now, Judge Jackson is the 116th justice, and there were previously only 5 women before her. Why do you think this continues to be a long journey for women?
I think it continues to be a long journey for women for a couple reasons. I mean, women were not a part of the educational system for a while. At Harvard Law, the first Black woman to graduate Harvard Law was in 1956. And I believe the first woman to graduate from Harvard Law was in 1953. So we see that even in a school such as Harvard, women still weren't a part of the culture, weren't a part of the education system to even become judges. And a lot of our Supreme Court judges are from these higher institutions and historically white institutions that did not service the Black community and did not service women in general. So to see that women are just now rising to power, to fame, and getting in seats that men have had historically is not surprising because of where we've been and how society has placed women and their role in the household and less so in the educational system.
Now, I want to know your thoughts on the fact that we're still seeing first in positions of power. And although these are really great moments with Kamala Harris, for the Bronx, it was Vanessa L. Gibson, and now Judge Jackson. These are like amazing accomplishments, but we're still seeing first in the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it just shows that we have a long way to go. And I think that when Obama was elected president, everyone was like, now, like, Black people are equal. And it's like, no, Black people are not equal because we have a singular Black president. Black people are not equal in the United States just because Black women are not equal just because now we have Judge Jackson. And Black women are not equal now because we have Vice President Kamala Harris. We can see that we have these first, but that doesn't mean that the first are going to create a pathway for other people to come after them. We see that, like, after Barack Obama, we have backlash. And so even though we have these first and they're historical moments, they also show that the underpinnings of our society are racist. They show the systematic injustices that have caused us to have to get over these hurdles to become the first, and still that we are seeing these first in society. And so though these first are an accomplishment, it should also shed a light on what it has taken for Black people to get here, what it has taken for us to achieve, and how we have been historically disenfranchised that we still are seeing these first.
Now, although Jackson has done the work, she endured a lot during those hearings, which you talked about a little bit, which resulted in an emotional moment between Senator Cory Booker and Judge Jackson. Can you explain the importance of Senator Booker publicly showing support in the way that he did?
Well, first of all, I thought that was a beautiful moment. Judge, I thought that was a beautiful moment because in this moment we see a Black man supporting a Black woman. And so much of the time we see that this is the other way around, where we see Black women supporting Black men and using their voice in the room to be that support. And so to see Senator Booker take that time to not only educate his peers, but also educate the world that was watching about her accomplishments so she didn't have to speak on that herself. Because sometimes to hear a man's voice is more validating for people, because women, and especially Black women, are twice marginalized. And so that moment was huge. And I felt that moment when Senator Booker said, like, Judge Jackson looks just like my mom. Because Judge Jackson does look just like my mom. You know, like, she is a woman, she's a Black woman, she's a Christian. And those are all the ideals and attributes that my mom has as well. And so to see this moment and to see him embrace her, to see him educate people on her behalf, was something that was powerful, was something that was beautiful. And then it was just a Black moment and a Black experience that I'm happy the world got to see.
Now, can you tell us what challenges do we face in this career field? Because although it was nice that he supported her, I think it just shows that we need that support in this type of field. So what are some challenges that we may face if you're a Black woman going into law?
I think there are many challenges that you face as a Black woman going into law. Black lawyers make up less than 4% of the legal field. So that means that out of all the lawyers out there are not that many Black lawyers. So what does that mean to walk into a space where you are the only Black person? What does that mean to be at a table and people don't think that your voice needs to be heard? What does that mean that when you have success, or that when you're accepted into a position and people think it's because of affirmative action? I think that Black women and Black people and Black lawyers who step into these legal spaces are questioned on their brilliance, are questioned on their belonging, and questioned on whether or not they give value the sides of their diversity. When our minds are brilliant and who we are adds more than just diversity, but diversity of thought and not just race and creed.
Now, I've actually seen some clips from her Supreme Court hearing, and they went viral because of the types of questions that were being asked, the amount of questions that were being asked. Is this process the norm in this type of position, or was this possibly a display of misogyny and even misogynoir?
Personally, I think that some of the questions were like out of touch and like not something that I've seen with other confirmations. I think that when Judge Jackson got asked about a confirmation of another justice that is currently on the bench, I thought that was out of scope. When Judge Jackson was asked about critical race theory, I thought that was because she was a Black woman. When a lot of her cases were brought to limelight and she was asked to recall these small, minute details in her cases, I thought that was also kind of absurd. So we see that even in her confirmation, even in like her going through this process, that she was looked at twice as hard as her other counterparts. And there are people who I feel like historically have been on the bench who weren't asked those same questions.
Now, I really want to talk a little bit about your Harvard experience. I think that's so amazing, and it's really exciting that you share that quality with Judge Jackson. Can you tell me what it was like to be at a predominantly white institution as a Black woman in law?
Yes. So being at Harvard Law is definitely, as a Black woman, you have to form community. Being a part of the Harvard Black Law Students Association is a part of the community that I have formed here at Harvard, because you need a voice, or you need people to voice to once you get into a discussion in class about contract law or about criminal law in which you feel like the Black voice is not heard. As someone who also went to a historically white university for undergrad, I feel like Harvard Law has had some of its own different challenges because of the institution and because of the expectations that I have going to an Ivy League school and going to a school with the name as Harvard, such as Harvard. So I think that it has been a difficult journey just due to the fact that there are all of these expectations that you have for yourself and that you have for the institution. And being able to be a part of Black spaces on campus has allowed me to have a home away from home.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I could imagine that there's sometimes a lot of pressure, but when you do succeed, there's so many people there to celebrate that. And that kind of goes into my next question. How do you think Judge Jackson will shape the court and just the future of Black women in law, or even women in law?
Yes, I think I'm excited for Judge Jackson to be on the court. I'm excited to read her opinions in my case textbooks now. I think that because she has had a huge range of experiences as a judge and as a public defender, we see that those are qualities that not everyone on the bench has had. And so she will add a different perspective to the court. She will add a different voice. And so I'm excited to see those changes. I'm excited to see what she has to offer. And I'm excited to just be able to be in this historical moment as law will start to change based off of her presence in those conversations.
All right, Dara, thank you so much for joining me and just sharing your experience and just sharing the positivity for this one. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
All right, can you quickly just tell us your social media so people can stay up to date with you?
Sure. My social media, I only have an Instagram, and my Instagram is uncensored_justice.
Okay, and then can you also say for the Harvard Black Association?
Yes. So actually, if you would like to follow the Harvard Black Law Students Association, our Instagram handle is Harvard Balsa. And we also have a website. If you do harvardbalsa.com, you should be able to find us, and you should be able to reach us if you have any questions or if you would like to reach out.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and have a great day.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. In 2020, our world changed and so did the future of work. Due to pandemic restrictions, many longed for a return to normalcy, but our society may need to adapt to a new way of working and living. Joining me for discussion on the future of work is Dr. Brian Kropp, Vice President and Chief of Research at Gartner. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, you recently wrote an article titled 11 Trends That Will Shape Work in 2022 and Beyond. And you write that we've been living through the greatest workplace disruption. Now, most of the country is trying to navigate what the workplace will actually look like. Can you first start off by telling me your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah. So back in March of 2020, when the pandemic first hit, it was one of the hardest experiences that anyone who's ever had to manage employees has ever had to go through. But the experience that everyone had was very consistent, was very similar. We mostly all went and worked from home for those of us who had jobs that could be done that way. What's going on now, though, is going to be even harder than what we experienced in March of 2020. And the reason why is that it's not an even and consistent experience. Some people are going to be working from home, some people in an office, some people there sometimes of the day, other times of the day. There's a lot more variability and unevenness. So we're going from a very consistent, predictable world to a very inconsistent, highly variable world in terms of how people are going to be working in a hybrid remote environment. And you layer on top of that everything we've learned about each other across the last 2 years. The importance of things like social justice, inclusion, the health and concerns that our employees have about themselves and their families and their communities. So you layer all of that on top, and it's just going to be an incredibly complex and difficult work environment to manage going forward. But if we do it well, we're going to be rewarded with employees that are higher performing, more likely to stay, and some significant cost savings for our organization.
So in that same article, you state that fairness and equity may be a problem for some organizations. Can you further explain that?
Yeah, one of the things that we've really started to see and has been uncovered the last couple of years is that different employees are treated differently. And that is creating a lot of significant problems. Here are some examples. So there's some employees that have moved to a lower cost of living location, but are having just the same impact as others who live in a higher cost of living location. Should we pay them differently or not? Some of our employees got additional support during the pandemic to help take care of kids and pay for daycare. That was great for those employees who got that very needed support, but is that fair to other people who didn't get that sort of support? Some people, by the very nature of their job, have the ability to work flexibly. Others don't. Do we make adjustments for those who can't work flexibly for one reason or another? I could go on and on with example after example of how these questions of fairness and how different employees are treated differently across work. And that's only becoming more highlighted because of remote and hybrid work and all the things that we're seeing going on right now. So what companies really need to be thinking about is how do they meet the needs of any individual employee in a way that's fair across all of the employees. And that, we think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges that executives face in 2022 and beyond.
Now, I know many feel that it's a privilege just to work from home in general, and now to even work hybrid. Do you think we'll continue to see this type of imbalance play out in years to come?
Yeah, the reality is we're entering our remote and hybrid future. And frankly, there's no going back for a variety of reasons. One, employees just want to work this way. They find it more productive, more engaging in a lot of cases. And the fact is, every other company is providing it, so you as an employer have to provide it. You layer on top of the fact that companies that really adopt a remote and hybrid strategy are able to achieve really significant cost savings and have access to a broader labor market. They could hire people from anywhere. So you put all of that together. Employees like it, employers want it, and it's cheaper. This remote hybrid world is going to be the future no matter what happens. It's just a question of how much and how does it actually work. We're not going back to everyone in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Those days are long gone and they're not coming back.
Now, in regards to fairness and equity, working hybrid may cause challenges for women and people of color, a population that we've learned actually prefers to work from home, like other employees as well. Can you explain why it may be a challenge for that population specifically?
Yeah, one of the things that we certainly see is that employees who work remote or hybrid are just as high performing as those who come into an office every day. On average, there's no difference in performance. And maybe those who work remote and hybrid are slightly higher performing. But what we can say with certainty is that they're not lower performing. However, most managers disagree with that fact. About 2 out of 3 managers say they're more likely to promote people who come into the office and more likely to give a higher raise to people who come and work in the office. Now, that's wrong on the surface because we're over promoting and over rewarding people who aren't higher performing. But this is where it gets worse. Women and people of color are more likely to say that they want to work remote or hybrid by about 10 percentage points. So if more women and people of color work remote and hybrid, and managers are biased against people who work remote and hybrid, the net effect of that is the diversity in our leadership pipelines will get worse. The gender wage gaps that almost every company has will get worse. So we have to be really cognizant of making sure we're treating people fairly who work remote and hybrid. Because if we don't, our organizations are going to become less diverse and less inclusive.
Thank you so much for explaining that, because when I first read that, I was a little shocked and I thought it would be like a different reason. But I'm really happy that you explained that. And I think it's something that people should definitely look into a little bit more. Now, can you tell me more about the war for talent and the great resignation? In regards to the future and current state of work, these are terms that are being used a lot. So can you first start off with the great resignation?
Yeah, so when people are talking about the great resignation, what they're talking about is just the incredibly high level of turnover that is existing across most organizations. Depending upon what you look like, what you look at, what segment you use, what industry, all those sorts of things, we're having millions of people quit every quarter. In fact, we're seeing more turnover now than we've seen in any of our lifetimes in the workplace. And if this pace of turnover stays where it is, companies are going to see 1 out of 3 employees quit in the 12-month period. That's incredibly high turnover. So when we talk about the great resignation, that's what we're talking about. Lots of people quit. When we talk about the war for talent, what we're talking about is the difficulty that companies have attracting talent and getting people to join their company. Now, what a lot of companies are doing is simply just trying to pay people more money to get them to come and work. The challenge with that is it's just expensive as an employer. And 2, if you're just paying your new employees more money, but not your existing employees those same compensation increases, then that's just not fair. Why should new employees get paid more money than the people that have been working at your organization for a while? That's wrong, it's unfair. So what we're actually finding companies doing is, rather than experimenting to win in the war for talent, experimenting with money and paying people more money, they're experimenting with giving people and employees more flexibility over time. Not just flexibility about where they work, but when they work and how much they work. So you might have seen a lot of the talk and excitement now about the idea of a 32-hour work week or a 4-day work week. Part of that is driven by companies trying to come up with new and innovative ways to attract and hire employees, rather than just offering more money to get those employees to join your company.
Now, we can't talk about the future of anything without bringing up technology. Technology has aided many of us to work from home safely. Now you believe it will actually be used to measure our performance while we work outside of the office. Can you elaborate?
Yeah. So before the pandemic, about 30% of large employers use some sort of monitoring software to keep track of at least some of their employees. So this would be things like keeping track of when you log in and log off, how much you're typing on your keyboard, things like that. At the early part of the pandemic, what a lot of executives thought and were worried about was, well, if all these people are working from home, they're just going to sit around, take naps, and watch TV all day. They're not going to get anything done. And so in response, what many of them did was buy more modern technology to track their employees. And for large employers, that number is now up to about 60% of large employers have this sort of monitoring and tracking software for at least some of their employees. Now, that has given them great insights into how much people are working, where are they struggling, what are they working on, and so on. It can also be used for bad purposes, but for the most part, it's used to really help employees. But you put that monitoring technology together with all of the video technology that we're using now to engage with each other, to have meetings, to connect, and so on. Employers have an enormous amount more of data and information about their employees. So again, it's gone from 30% to more than 60%. And they're starting to use that information to figure out who are their highest performing employees, which employees are making the biggest contribution, who's working the hardest, and so on. So the tools that we're now using to do our job are also becoming the tools that companies are using to track us doing our job.
Wow. So I think that's really interesting. And in the article, there are so many other trends that we may see in the future. We have about 2 minutes left. Could you quickly just say, do you think that we'll actually benefit from adapting to a non-traditional form of work?
Yeah, what we would certainly see from all the research we've done, all the analysis, all the surveys, everything like that we've done, is that when companies and employers enable this sort of flexibility for employees, those employees are better off and the company's better off. And here's what I mean by that. There's some people that naturally work better in the mornings or the afternoons. There's some people that just naturally work better from home and others in an office place. And when we give our employees that flexibility, they're more productive, they're less likely to quit, which is good for the company. But it's also really good for the employee. When they have that sort of flexibility over where, when, and how much they work, as long as they're getting their work done, they have better mental health, better physical health, they sleep better at night, they have better financial health. By adopting this idea of radical flexibility, employees are better off and employers are better off as well.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for joining me to talk about the future of work. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
To the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. As employees return to the workplace, they are noticing their favorite lunch items may cost more than they remember. Organization Square reveals data on the rising prices and what they're calling lunchflation. Joining me to discuss the new trend is Executive Director of New York City Hospitality Alliance, Andrew Rigie. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, restaurants and food services have been amongst those hardest hit businesses over the past few years. Can you detail how they've been affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, New York's hospitality industry has been devastated by COVID. We've lost thousands of restaurants and bars. We don't have an exact number yet, but it's been devastating. And so many, unfortunately, are still teetering on the edge of survival. About 65% of restaurants in New York that applied for the Federal Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant were shut out when the money was quickly exhausted. So we're urging Congress to replenish that fund so these small businesses can get the support that they need. And in New York City alone, we're still about 60,000 jobs short in our city's restaurants and bars compared to pre-pandemic employment levels. And there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think the thing we've learned throughout the pandemic is the only thing that's certain is that everything is going to be uncertain, and our restaurants and hospitality businesses are going to continue to have to do that pivot word that everyone's really been talking about over the past 2 years.
Now, I understand that we're also experiencing a supply chain shortage. How is this affecting restaurants?
This has been really tough for this people that are actually building out new restaurants because there were vacant storefronts throughout the city. So it actually created an opportunity. Some people's crisis became an opportunity for others. So people that are ordering different types of equipment, kitchen equipment, tiles, and all these other materials are facing significant supply chain issues and delays in getting what they need. And then food costs have skyrocketed. And it's really across the board. It's not just one or two products where you can find a supplement for it. It's things like butter and oil that have to go in nearly every dish, and things like gloves that used to cost somewhere around $20 a case, now upwards of $100.
So like you said, we're seeing these prices and people are calling it lunchflation. Can you explain why the prices are so high at this time?
Yeah, unfortunately, for many years, even predating the pandemic, restaurant meals cost a lot less than they really should. And there's a lot of different pressures and a lot of different reasons for that. But now what we're seeing is consumers are at many restaurants price sensitive. So restaurants are still unable to fully increase their prices, but they have to increase them to some degree and do that balancing act to not lose business because of labor costs have skyrocketed. And we still have this labor shortage. Many restaurants are operating short staffed. And all the food products and everything else that they're purchasing has continued to go up. And they have all of this pandemic related debt. So the only way that they can try to keep their doors open, hopefully pay back some of this debt, pay everyone, pay their vendors, their employees, is to increase menu prices. And I think we're seeing that at many places.
Yeah, so I've experienced that myself. And I paid like about $6 for a sandwich that normally costs like $4. Is this something that I should have expected? Should we all have expected the prices to go up eventually?
Food prices are going to go up. For a long time, there have been so much competition among different restaurants. Different types of restaurants, consumers are definitely price sensitive. There's only so much someone wants to pay for a sandwich or a bowl of pasta or pizza before they go, oh, you know what, that seems pretty expensive. And you have options. You can pack food at home, bring it into the office, or if you're at home, prepare food. So it's one of those luxury items. It's not something like sneakers where I guess very few people are going to make their own sneakers at home, but they can make their sandwich at home. So I think it's expected, but we're really encouraging people that have the means to do it to go out, spend the extra money, because you'll get a great meal, number one. Number two, we need these small businesses to be able to recover. We need them to be able to employ New Yorkers because it's all part of this larger economic ecosystem. But let's hope at some point we don't continue to see all these operating costs go up and up and up, So it alleviates some of the pressure on restaurants to increase their menu prices.
Now, is this a nationwide problem or is this something primarily affecting New Yorkers?
No, this is definitely nationwide. I think it's global. I think the war in Ukraine with Russia, that's having an impact as well. You had different issues in different places with different crops as well. And I think what we've seen from COVID is it's really just impacted society in so many different ways. And we're really seeing those impacts play out in so many different ways. And one of them is the cost to produce a restaurant meal, a restaurant experience. Food costs, labor costs are very, very high in the restaurant industry. And the profit margins, if there is any profit, are very, very small, especially with all this pandemic debt. So it's really kind of an impossible situation for so many restaurants to be in. Fortunately, people want to go out, they want to support their local restaurants, they want to socialize, and food and restaurant is really part of the New York culture in so many ways
Right.
that thankfully people are going out. But we can also see people not only spending less, but spending differently, which also has an impact.
Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index surged 7.9% in the year through February 2022. Is this the new normal, or will prices go back to something that looks a little bit more comfortable and familiar to everyone?
I think it's going to be quite some time before we really see all of these costs coming down. And I'm not sure long term what it will ultimately look like impacting the price of restaurant meals. I think it's going to take some time, putting aside just the index and all of this, that different restaurants have been differently impacted. So, for example, if you are one of the fortunate restaurants that got a grant through the Federal Restaurant Revitalization Fund, you are in a much better place financially, and you can afford to pay higher prices for the products you need, higher wages to all of your employees, and you may be able to keep your prices a bit lower versus a restaurant right next door or across the block that didn't get this relief and does not have some financial cushion. So they have more wage pressure, more food cost pressure on them to increase their prices. So you may see restaurants that are selling similar types of food right in the similar vicinity of each other, but having different prices. And that could be impacted by what kind of government relief one restaurant got versus another.
Now, how do restaurants and fast food services determine pricing just in general? Because I think even before lunchflation, sometimes people considered some of these meals a little bit pricey.
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it. I'd say a local restaurant that's sourcing locally from farmers upstate in New York, they may have a higher food cost versus a national or international chain that's buying significant bulk from broadline distributors, may be able to keep their prices down a little bit, and they're also trying to attract more of the cost conscious consumers. So I think, again, one of the challenges for restaurants is trying to keep their prices within a area that their customers will continue to patronize and visit their restaurants while covering all their operating costs. Before the pandemic, I heard many full service restaurants were getting close to 40%, some even tip 40% labor costs as a percentage of their gross sales. And then you have restaurants up 20 to 35% of their food costs, depending on the type of cuisine that they serve, where they're purchasing their products. So as a total of their gross sales, these are huge percentages that are going to, one, the product, and two, the labor. And don't forget, for most of these restaurant meals, there's a lot of labor that goes into producing these products and these meals.
So how will lunchflation affect the many employees returning back to work?
Well, I think people are going to be, some people may be excited to go back into the office just to see their colleagues. Other people may not be happy because they're working remote. Other people may just want to go meet their friends for, happy hour at a bar after work, and they can be looking forward to that. But I think generally speaking, when people go to the office, if they haven't had a great meal at one of the restaurants that they remember, they'll want to go check it out. I think they could have potentially some sticker shock. But at the end of the day, if they've been eating most of their meals at home, I think it'll be really nice for someone to go buy something at a local restaurant. And while they have gone up, I don't think they've gone up the way that gas has gone up, maybe that some other products and services have gone up. But I think the thing that we've also seen from the pandemic, there's a psychological aspect that we are told to be socially distant. And, restaurants are places we come together to socialize and you get an experience. So it's not just the food product you're paying for, it's the overall experience. And I think people will calculate that, I hope, into that and be willing to pay. And because there has been a lot of attention to the plight of the restaurant industry, I'm hoping that they are not only willing to pay for the meals, but also leave nice tips for the workers because they rely on this income for their livelihood. And they've been hit so hard and so much has been asked of them during this pandemic, working in really an impossible and difficult situation.
So can you just tell us a little bit more about your social media and how people can stay up to date with you?
Absolutely. On Twitter, I'm at handle Andrew Rigie. That's ANDREW. Rigie, RIGIE. I'm at Political Foodie NYC on Instagram, and you can find the New York City Hospitality Alliance at the NYC Alliance on Instagram, on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're out there. And you can just go to our website, thenycalliance.org. We have an incredible community of restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and we've really been advocating and fighting for the support they need because we need our city's restaurants to recover, for New York City as a whole and the United States to recover. So we're there to serve them just like they're there to serve you. Hopefully your lunch, dinner, and maybe even breakfast.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.